Hi, I'm Miranda. I am a graduate student at Liberty University online, and this is my video submission for our oral midterm. First question, how has recent historical events affected the course of research in organizational psychology? So the topic of industrial organizational psychology kind of refers to the application of social sciences in terms of the formal workplace. It is a relatively newer field of psychology, therefore it has a very short sort of history that can kind of be separated into the focus that is relevant to the field at that time. So kind of everything began in the early 1900s with a very industrial focus on things such as organizational structure and worker behavior and how it sort of added value to the company. But overall, the focus was a very kind of industrial focused field in that it really focused on the company itself. And then that was kind of sort of until the 1920s where we start to see this shift into sort of a social or environmental focus, which really stemmed from what are known as the Hawthorne studies, which were a series of studies that sort of investigated the ways that an organization's environment can influence its employees. So things like work policies or working conditions, wages, time off procedures, things of that nature. And these studies were really the first to kind of demonstrate the impact that an organization has on the employees themselves. So we start to see this shift here from the industrial side of industrial organizational psychology to the organizational side and some of the social aspects that pertains to. We also start to see that even further with the concept of unionization as organizations are sort of forced to notice the mass presence that a large group of employees has on the success of a company. And then in the 40s, we kind of shift to this human relations perspective as we start to see the impact of things like World War II in terms of facilitating this kind of focus on morality and the treatment of individuals, as well as a huge flux of immigrants that are coming into the United States as a result of the things happening at that time, creating this huge pool of diversity in the workplace, bringing in topics such as moral and cultural treatment of those individuals as well. And then in the 60s, we start to see a shift to what they call a multi-level perspective, which really showed kind of the implications of social influences from groups of individuals as well as the organization. So we start to see sort of the interplay between employees and individual employees and groups of individuals and the organization and how they kind of go hand in hand. We also start to see a focus on more non-traditional topics of the workplace, so things like work-family conflict, stress levels, health levels, and things of that nature. And then kind of lastly, kind of from the 80s up to kind of today, we start to see what they call this global perspective, where we really see organizations start to focus on tackling the issues of how to motivate this wide range of employees with all these different cultural backgrounds and through all these different job market availabilities. And we see kind of this global perspective continue to increase with, as technologies increase, allowing for even greater communication and flexibility between organizations all over the world. Describe the socialization process for graduate students in your program. Is it successful in socializing newcomers and creating job embeddedness? So in terms of the socialization within the graduate program that I'm attending here at Liberty University, it's sort of a unique perspective in that I'm currently enrolled in an online university program, and so everything that we do is sort of solely reliant on written communication via the internet as compared to the more traditional classroom setting where you get to socialize and kind of have those classroom discussions that help you feel kind of a part of that social group. And instead, our kind of classroom discussions are carried out primarily through what we call weekly discussion board posts, where it's kind of like a chain of posts where we can go online and talk about our assignments and we can reply to other people's posts. I do think that it's really difficult to feel socially embedded with the school just because there is still that separation where those interactions still seem a little bit more cold, a little bit more closed off. But I do think that it does provide a system of socialization that would otherwise be non-existent. I know that without kind of the discussion board post being a part of my assignments, I probably wouldn't go out of my way to talk to other people within my program, and so it sort of forces me to do that. I also think that it's really great that the instructors are kind of usually pretty active in posting on those discussion boards weekly to the class. I think that in context of some of the things we learned, we've talked about these information-seeking tactics that are really important when a new employee is being hired on and trying to become socially embedded into a new company. It is important for them to feel like they have someone or somewhere they can go to seek information when they're not sure about the company or how to do something. And in that same kind of line, I think that having the instructors on our discussion board allows us to kind of help to facilitate an open relationship between the students and the instructors in kind of allowing students to feel more comfortable in seeking information about classes and assignments and things of that nature with those instructors. Fourth question, how can an organization reduce or prevent work-family conflict? So work-family conflict is sort of just this idea that there has to be a balance between one's work life and one's personal life. And there's a lot of research on the topic, but I really want to focus on the research that talks about a theory that talks about a resource theory, which basically states that as human beings, we have a finite amount of resources that make up our time and our energy. And when we don't have a balance, when we're focused too much on one end versus the other, that extra time and energy that we're using for that increased focus, we're actually pulling from somewhere else. And so basically it's saying, if I'm focused too much on work and I'm doing all this overtime and I'm investing in all these things, the extra added energy and time that I'm being required to utilize for those projects is coming from somewhere else in my life, so my personal life. And vice versa, if we're spending too much time focused on what's happening in our personal life, we're not adequately able to focus on the task at hand in our work life. And a lot of this research has focused on addressing this issue through what they called flexible work arrangements. And that just means kind of allowing employees to have a greater flexibility in terms of the hours that they work, the days that they work, but also sometimes in the location that they work, and kind of allowing them to feel that greater sense of control and autonomy that helps them work around some of those personal issues. If they're a single parent, they need childcare or things of that nature. But it also helps the company in that it increases job satisfaction because employees feel like their employers are really, working with them to make sure that they're comfortable and to take care of both aspects of their lives. And it kind of creates this increased commitment to the company and kind of reduces turnover rates as well. This one, I've been asked to develop a performance assessment program for employee development. What techniques could you use to adequately evaluate employee performance as comprehensively as possible, thinking of Murphy's List? So for those of you that don't know, Murphy's model of job performance has kind of 4 basic dimensions. Some of them are specifically related to an individual's capabilities within the job position, some of them outside. So he starts by focusing on what are called in-role or task-oriented behaviors. And these are sort of the behaviors that are required for an individual to be able to carry out successfully in order to be considered capable of doing their job. So say you have a nurse, there are certain things she's required to be able to carry out, so things like taking vital signs, drawing blood, etc. And these are things that would be really easy to assess through something like a competency evaluation where an employee is required to demonstrate his or her capability of carrying out a task. Additionally, Murphy talks about what are called interpersonally oriented behaviors. So these are behaviors that are still associated with the job but are not necessarily explicitly stated in the job position. So it may state in a nurse's job position that she's required to be able to draw blood, but it's not necessarily going to overtly state that she or he also has to be sure that they're able to communicate effectively with colleagues, with patients, with supervisors or doctors, and to work as part of a team in that aspect. And I think the easiest way to assess this would be through kind of eliciting feedback from others, so like clients or customers or patients as well as colleagues, but also eliciting feedback from the employee themselves, because I think a lot of times we think that we're communicating effectively, but maybe the other side or the other person is not perceiving it the same way that we are, and so it allows us to have that opportunity to receive that feedback and to work on some of those things and to hone in on some of those skills that we do need in order to be successful at our jobs. The third dimension that Murphy kind of talks about are what he calls downtime behaviors, or these are behaviors that are happening outside of the workplace, but they're also influencing job performance within the workplace. And these are going to be kind of the detrimental or the negative things that are happening in our lives that are being carried into work. Because usually the positive things don't carry too far into work, but things like recreational drug use or excessive drinking, if we're having a really high amount of stress or problems in our personal life, like the death of a family member or divorce or something like that. These are all things that could easily carry into our work life and kind of affect our performance at that level. And so I think the easiest way to assess for these behaviors would be, on the health end of things, making sure that employees get regular screenings as far as health and drug use, and making sure that they're keeping up on those areas. But also offering maybe like employee assistance programs that kind of maybe offer something like counseling services. So if someone is dealing with a lot of stress and it's affecting their ability to show up to work or to show up on time or to do their job while they're there, that they're able to address that while also working on rebalancing their work life there. And then the final dimension that Murphy talks about are destructive or hazardous behaviors in the workplace. So these are overt and malicious behaviors that an individual engages in that are usually directed towards a person within the company or the organization itself. And these are going to be things that the easiest way to assess for them are just going to be sort of regularly monitoring employee behavior as far as supervision or through the use of security cameras, but also having kind of an open line of communication where employees can discuss some of the things that are bothering them so that hopefully they don't get to that level of being so frustrated with another individual or a company that they feel the need to retaliate. And then lastly, what are some possible common organizational constraints and how could they lead to counterproductive behaviors? So counterproductive behaviors are kind of like those we just mentioned. They're typically directed at a person or a company. They could be things like not showing up for work when you are showing up for work, not doing your job, stealing from the company. And a lot of times these are being generated out of these sort of situational causes that employees are experiencing, sometimes at the hand of an organization, and not necessarily on purpose. So some possible constraints from an organization that might be perceived from the employee as being unjust or unfair would be things like feeling like they're working too long of hours, they're not getting paid the wage that they think they should, they're not getting the time off they think they should. These are all things that an organization has to make sure that they're really balancing for all its employees, but it's also very subjective as far as what the employee feels that he or she deserves versus the treatment that she's receiving. So for example, if you work in a hospital, they have a large number of employees. They work 24 hours a day, which also requires a lot of people to work holidays, and a lot of times employees can feel that they are being unfairly treated or are not receiving all the benefits that they think they should because of these constraints that the organization has to follow in order to treat all of its employees fairly and also take care of all of its patients. But those are just some of the things that we have kind of learned over the past few weeks, and thanks for listening.